There are thousands of beautiful beaches in the UK, most of a cafe, most of a car park, but not many have a factory, and this one did. Now that's a little bit weird. There's no harbour, there's no major roads, there's no railway, so why on earth would you build a factory here? Now you might think it was something to do with fishing or maybe to do with a mill, but it was neither of those things. In fact, it was actually to do with these cliffs behind me, and that is what I'm going to talk you through today. So to me, when you come to Branscombe, the cliffs really stand out, but admittedly, I'm a geologist, so they would. But I think anyone can see they are red, really, really red. So these rocks were deposited during the Triassic period, so we're looking about 220, 230 million years ago around here. Let me transport you back to the Triassic in this area. Let's go and have a look. So, generally, we have all of these red mudstones. In between all this red mudstone, you could see this sort of stuff that almost looks like someone poured concrete on the cliff. That's what we're here to look at. To understand how all of this got here, we need to think back to a time when this place looked very, very different. There was no beach, there was no Devon, there was no England. Instead, we were on a supercontinent called Pangaea, far, far closer to the equator, roughly where North Africa is now. This would have been a desert environment with shallow rivers, salty lagoons and vast mudflats. So to imagine what this looks like, I need to take you far, far away from this quaint Devon beach and all the way to the Geo.Sassie in Qatar, which is a good example of this kind of environment in the modern day. And you can probably already get the idea, it's pretty arid. So the area you can see here is a type of environment called a sabkha, and it basically is when intense desert heat evaporates shallow groundwater just sitting under the surface, and the dissolved minerals get left behind and concentrate on the surface of the desert. Now, how does the water come up? Well, it's basically capillary action. You know, like when you put a bit of dry paper in the edge of a glass and the water just creeps its way up the tissue? It's kind of like that, but rock in a desert, and then it all crystallises on the surface. Now, I couldn't get street view exactly in the sabkha itself, but I found it on the road nearby here. So, the point is, you can see these areas are pretty flat and pretty bleak. And this is the kind of area that the rocks that we're looking at here would have formed in, this sort of inland flat desert environment. And that is what we're looking at here. As these minerals ended up concentrating more and more and more into these salty beds, you got a build-up of calcium and other materials, and they form these little crystals. So, wonderful, we have this deposit, but what is it, and why did anybody care? This mineral that we're looking at here is called gypsum, and this gypsum has had a very eventful life before it got here. As you've noticed, we're not in Pangaea anymore. You might notice that when beds form, they form flat. And this, it looks a bit higgledy-piggledy. It doesn't look very flat. And there's a very good reason for that. So when all these plate tectonics have moved around, the pressure has got to go somewhere. And as this is quite a weak rock layer, this is where it chose to come out. So in this, you can see lots of wiggly bends and little bits where it snaps, pinches out, and it's very, very mangled. And this is where it just took the brunt of the tectonic forces. And there's some really cool features in this cliff that I'd just like to point out a little bit. So you can see, for example, we've got something roughly going that way, and then we've got something else sort of cutting across it this way. Those will be what we call shear planes. So that is literally where the rock has fractured against itself underground. The minerals have remobilised and then recrystallised in these little joints. And there's tiny ones going all throughout this rock. So this is just a history of the rock being mangled. And this is going to play an interesting part in our story later, because as you'll notice, it's not one perfect scene. You've got different types of crystallisation going on. So you've got this fibrous one. This is what I'd call classic gypsum. And then you've got these sort of noduley, knobbly bits, which I think are meant to be a bit more anhydrite-y, but probably been replaced again with gypsum later. but they are stunning. I really like it. I do really like it. Anyway, me being mesmerised aside, by now we've answered one part of the mystery. We know there's gypsum in the cliffs, but why would we bother building a factory for that? Well, better tell you why gypsum is important then, hadn't I? The answer is surprisingly simple. It has a fantastic property that when you heat it to 150 degrees centigrade, it drives off water. Powder that down and you've got something nice and easy to transport. So this powder has a handy property. If you add water back to it, it kind of re-solidifies again once you've let it dry. And the mines around Paris were particularly good at finding this stuff. So it's called plaster of Paris. So the factory that was here was a plaster of Paris factory. And they used the gypsum from these cliffs to create all kinds of local wonders. In fact, records suggest that as far back as the 1300s, they were using the gypsum from right here for buildings such as Exeter Cathedral. Obviously the factory wasn't here at this point, but it sowed the seed of why there might be a use of having a factory here. So for years, this has been used in lots of different local repairs, church repairs, things like that. So in 1855, William Wheaton of Exeter decided to build a factory here. He decided instead of just quarrying small amounts, let's turn it into an industrial process. He decided to build a factory right here using this stream that I'm stood next to help power the mill. And the beauty is it's right next to the beach, so we didn't have to transfer the gypsum very far. Water was diverted from further up the valley into a leat. This powered a water wheel and that powered the mill. So this was a good location to get some free energy in effect. And this would have been a fantastic plan and would have gone great, except for one thing. The gypsum here wasn't particularly pure. Remember those gorgeous structures? Well, it's a good way of having muds in between, and some other impurities you just don't want. So they ended up finding that they couldn't really compete with the mines of Paris and other big producers. As time went on, it didn't become a very viable factory, but the story didn't end there, because there's another really useful property of gypsum that this guy, William Wheaton, honed in on. Gypsum is made of calcium sulfate, which turns out is also really useful in farmers' fields. So the other really important use that we have for gypsum is it can be used as a fertiliser. Farmers can add it to a heavy clay soil and it improves the structure, adds calcium and sulfate, all without really playing with the soil's pH at all. And it lived on as a fertiliser factory. However, eventually the reserves started growing a little bit drier, it wasn't quite as useful, so they decided to let the operation go. And today, very little of the history is left here, but I know where the cafe is now. It was meant to be roughly in this area, so the entire history of this place can be traced back to the geology, whether that's the ancient deserts that were here, whether that's the impurities that were in the gypsum that caused a failed business venture, to the beautiful beach that we have here today. And it's all thanks to the geology. And if you like quirky little geology stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and I will see you in the next one.